Hey there, everyone. Good morning. That was an exciting little musical introduction. How's it going? I hope you were doing well. So here is what we're going to do today. We are going to very quickly, let's see, let's do entire screen. I'm going to share my screen. And then we're gonna, oh, am I going to end up in like an infinite loop? Whoa, infinite loop. But hopefully now you can see just my screen. Okay, so Abhijit, you can jump in and let me know if if I'm showing the infinite loop of myself going backwards a million times, or if I'm actually just sharing my PowerPoint. Okay. All right, guys, it's the final countdown. We are a week, 5 days, a week, 2 weeks away from a lot of upcoming deadlines. So what we're going to do today is this is going to be a refreshingly brief presentation from me. Those of you who have seen me before are like, wow, this woman sure can talk. And that is true. But I've got a lot less to talk about today, but I think it's important stuff. So here's what we're going to cover today. Here are my top tips for if your deadlines are coming up soon. Do not plan to submit exactly at the deadline. Double check your recommendations. Put those essays away for a day or two to fill out the forms. Then go back and look at your essays, but with fresh eyes. And then finally, at the end of all of this, I want you to relax and have a reward for yourself, something waiting for you that you can sort of look forward to as you get through this grueling process. So super quickly, for those of you who don't know who I am, I'm Maria. I'm a graduate of Harvard Business School, and I'm the founder of Applicant Lab. Other admissions consultants charge $300, $400, $500 or more per hour for advice. Applicant Lab costs less than an hour of an admissions consultant's time, or at least someone of my caliber. There are a lot of charlatans out there who charge less, but for people like me, all of Applicant Lab is for the same price, and it gets really good reviews on GMAT Club. And if you're listening to this, you're like, but I'm about to submit. Like, I don't need Applicant Lab anymore. But just in case you submit this time and it doesn't work out, think about me if you find yourself reapplying in the future. Okay, so tip number 1. I want you to tell yourself that the deadline is actually earlier than it is, because it is human nature to think to ourselves, okay, the deadline is, 11:59 or 4:59 p.m. or 11:59 p.m. or whatever it is that they say on the website. And so I'm going to hit submit. I'm going to start uploading my stuff at 11:45. This does not mean that you are a failure of a human being. This is just the way people are. And Abhijit has learned this because he has me log into these 15 minutes early. He sends the invite for 15 minutes early, knowing that that's the best way to do things. I am not immune to this behavior either. The problem is if you tell yourself, okay, I have until 11:59 to hit submit, you run a very big risk of being late. And the reason for that is that these are all submitted online through application portals. What if the server that is managing the application portal has a slightly different internal clock than your computer, and it closes a minute? Like, your computer says it's 11:58, but their computer, they're like, oh, it's 11:59 for us, and they shut you out. There is a lot of traffic that comes in those last hour or two before the big deadlines. And so in the past, sometimes these portals have gotten just clogged, and you get the spinning wheel of death. You have no idea if your ISP might go out or if your browser might freeze. So really mentally tell yourself that if the deadline is like 11:59, tell yourself it's a few hours earlier, and stick to that. Like, treat it as the truth. So that way, worst case scenario, you'll still have plenty of time. If there is a snafu, you'll have plenty of time to recover. But you will not find yourself in the situation where you're like, oh my gosh, I'm sitting here, I've got all my stuff ready, I was getting ready to hit submit, and boom, I'm logged out. It's not their responsibility if you miss the deadline by a few minutes, right? Because these deadlines have been up for months. So, and everyone has the same deadline, and everyone has the same 24 hours a day. And so if you're like, oh, well, I was just 3 minutes late, look, sometimes they'll be nice, but they don't have to be nice. And you don't want to be in the stressful position with your stomach through the floor because you're like, oh my gosh, it just logged me out and I hadn't finished submitting yet. Oh, the other thing that sometimes causes delays is if you have to pay for the application fee. What if your credit card doesn't go through the first time? What if you need to end up perhaps trying it several times or borrowing a credit card from a friend or who knows what? So again, just the mental trick is instead of saying, yeah, Maria, I'll submit early. Okay, got it. Like literally put it in your calendar for several hours ahead of time. I actually got a heartbreaking email from a client last week who was submitting to a school and was on the essay upload page and was up literally like uploading the PDF of the essay, and it was like, boop, sorry, portal's closed. So what do you, I mean, in that situation, if you're in that situation, you obviously you email the essay immediately to admissions and you say something went wrong. And I'm sure they will be nice, but you don't want to, what if they're not? They don't have to be. So don't put yourself in that situation. Okay. So with that sort of mental hack out of the way, the first concrete thing I want you to do to get ready to submit is to check your recommenders. Have your recommendations been submitted yet? I mean, have they? Are you sure? Yeah, Maria, Maria, it's fine. I told my boss last week. She know. I mean, I mentioned it to her. Are you sure? Because it's not just your stuff that's due at the deadline, it's also the recommendation letters. And besides, if worse comes to worse and it's 2 days before the deadline and you're still a long ways to go, you can always force yourself to pull an all-nighter, but you can't convince your boss. You can't be like, oh, by the way, my deadline's tomorrow. You haven't written the stuff yet. Well, why don't you just stay up until 3 in the morning and write me this amazing letter? Like, how do you think that's going to go? Not well. So check as soon as you can to make sure that your recommenders have either already submitted or are about to submit, and use the same trick with them that you use for yourself. Don't say to them it's due at 11:59 p.m. Eastern time at what. No, be like, yeah, it's actually due at noon. Right? So that way they mentally are working towards an earlier time. It's true as with if you miss the deadline with the portal, like sure, there might be a grace period of a day or two, right? A school might say like, look, we understand that the recommenders are not under your control. Things happen. They might be like, so that's what the schools say because, they want your admissions fees. And yeah, they might allow it, but just ask yourself like who's going to look like they have their stuff together. I'm not allowed to swear in these. At least I don't think so. I've never tried. Who's going to look like they've got their stuff together, right? The person whose recommenders were submitted a day in advance, or the person who's like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I need an extra day. My boss is on vacation, but right? Like they might still take it, but you're not going to look as good if they're late. In fact, one of the key reasons that recommendations are even asked for, it's not simply to get a sense of like, you know, what does your boss think about you? But it is in part an exercise in you proving to them that you can manage upwards, that you can, in fact, influence and motivate someone over whom you have no authority to do something really nice for you and something that's quite frankly quite a bit of a pain in the patoot. So that's part of it. So if you're unsuccessful in getting that recommender on time, it's not going to like, oh, that's the one thing you wouldn't have gotten in, but that's the one thing that makes you rejected. But it just doesn't look good. And this is such a competitive process. You want to look good as frequently as you can across every possible dimension. So since this is out of your hands, I want this to be the first thing you do as soon as I'm done with this presentation. Go into your portals, check to see if those recommenders have uploaded yet. If they haven't, drop them a note like in 10 minutes after I'm done. Just friendly, asking them what's up. Okay. And then this might be counterintuitive because my next tip, because I know that like there's just so much obsession with the essays, right? You go on the message boards and everyone's like, what about this essay? What are you writing for that essay? And it's funny because the essays are really important, but they're not like 100% important. They're like 20% or less important. In fact, the resume, if you've seen my resume presentation in the past, the resume technically counts more than the essays in terms of conveying your professional accomplishments and therefore making a positive impact on the admission officer who is reading. So I want you to put away the essays for a day or two. Hopefully you're watching this, you've still got a couple days before the deadline. Put away the essays for a day, at least a day. And now I want you to instead fill out the forms. I want you to go into the schools you're applying to, fill out everything, all of them, the little forms, and then save the essay for last. Because if you're just focused 99% of your attention on the essays, you're gonna leave the forms for last, and then you'll be rushed, and they're gonna be sloppy. And you might think this is another sort of, I don't know what this, human psychological failing is, that you might log into the form like a month ago and you might be like, oh, whatever, Maria. I looked through it quickly. It's whatever. It's my name, my address, my citizenship. What? Like, how hard could it be? It's going to be 5 minutes. Um, Except it's not. Because as you go in and you actually start filling out these forms, there is not one standard form that you fill out once, like the common application in US colleges, that you fill out once and then it populates all of your information. They really should do that, but they don't. I don't know why. Uh, but so every single school is going to have a different form. And they not only ask you for your name and address, but as you start digging in, you're going to realize, OMG, there's a ton of other stuff in here. There are often little hidden mini essays. They might be about your family background. Are you the first in your family to go to college? Describe any extenuating circumstances when you were growing up. Describe extenuating circumstances when you were going to college. Did you leave that job? Why did you leave that job? Were you fired? Why were you fired? How much research have you done to our school? Have you talked to 15 people? How many people? How many webinars did you attend? Right? Like, there are going to be lots of little things in there. And again, I don't want you to be in a situation where you're like, tra-la, tra-la, I'm ready to submit. Let me upload my essay. And then you're like, OMG, there's like 5 million different things in here. And one of the biggest mistakes is that all of these application forms have a section for the employment where you're going to list a certain number of jobs. And by the way, pay attention. Every school has different rules about which pieces of employment they want to see. So please read these carefully. Some schools will say, look, if you've had 3 different jobs at the same company, just list that company once and then describe the details of those 3 different jobs in your resume. Other schools will say, you know what, treat each one of those as a separate employer for the purposes of the application. There's going to be different rules. Some schools say, please don't put any college internships. We don't care. Other schools will say, please put college internships. We're totally interested. So anyway, in particular, schools will often ask, they won't just say, where did you work and how long? They'll often ask like a little box or multiple boxes that will say something like, please describe your responsibilities, your key accomplishments. And some might even ask you for a failure, or they might phrase it as a challenge. Like, what was a challenge that you had to overcome? Basically, when was there a time that maybe at first you weren't doing great and then you recovered? Or what was a huge roadblock that you faced that we would have never guessed from the resume? A big mistake that I think people make is that they just say, well, gosh, I just spent like 2 weeks on the stupid resume. I'm just going to copy and paste, right? So when it says, what are your responsibilities? I'm just going to go bloop, bloop, control C, control V, done. And the problem with that is that, first of all, they would not be asking these little boxes in the application. If they just wanted to see the resume over again, why would they bother asking for the little box over again? They could just go back to the resume and read it twice. They don't want to see the resume stuff over again. That's why they ask a separate question. So I want you to rewrite those descriptions. My advice is to write it in a more conversational tone, right? Because resumes, you have to be a little bit stuffy because it's a resume. But so in the application form, this is your chance to sort of describe it more in plain English. The way you might describe it, I don't know, at a cocktail party. I don't remember what those are. We had them before COVID. I think human beings, we used to get together and meet new people. It's vague, it's fuzzy. But so yeah, the way, if you're meeting someone new, how would you describe your job? Right? You'd say, well, I maximize synergies on a consistent basis amongst 14 multinational branches. Or do you say like, hey, yeah, I make sure that the payments work? Right? You would probably put it more the second way. So I don't want you to be informal, but I want you to be a lot less formal than you would be in the resume. Please rewrite it, because at the very least, it looks lazy. Right? It's like, oh, come on. You really want to come to you're trying to convince me you really, really, really want to come to our school. You can't even be bothered to like rewrite this thing on your resume. Like, okay, yeah, right. Other mistakes that happen, we all think like, I'm never going to be the person who makes this mistake. Maria's telling me these cautionary tales, but I will never be and then every year it happens. Dates of employment, your salary. Some schools will say, please put your annual salary. Some schools will say don't include bonuses. Some schools will say please include bonuses. Don't put the bonus in a separate thing. If it's a summer internship, some will say put your monthly salary. Some will say annualize what your salary would have been if you would have been there for 12 months. Make sure that the title is exactly the same title. If they do the background check, if you get accepted, there will be a background check, and they hire an external firm that's going to call. So if internally you're like, well, technically my title is operations analyst, but internally everyone knows me as project manager, so I'm going to put project manager in the form. It's gonna freak them out later. So make sure that everything is accurate, so that way you don't cause any friction later on. Similarly with GPA, like if you log in at the last minute, some of them will say, look, if you didn't go to an American college or a college that does things on a 4.0 scale, leave this blank. Others will say, you know what? Like, here's our scale. Please go through your transcript and translate your grades using this GPA scale. So again, like, there's so much to do. And so the good news is if you go through it a couple of days in advance, you won't be blindsided. And also it's going to give you a nice mental break from the essays. So what I suggest, yeah, and also some schools might ask for different score reports. So some schools will say, okay, just upload your best GMAT or GRE score. Some schools will say, well, how many times have you taken it? Some schools, you know what I mean? So just, again, like, don't just sort of be like, oh, I'm just going to go through and it's going to be the same for all of them. Like, there are little nuances and you want to follow directions. So I do think, though, that what you can do to try to reduce that variability if you're applying to multiple schools is maybe make a master document somewhere that has like little boxes where you can copy and paste. So that way you don't have to mentally think through what you're going to write 5 different times. You've got it just once. Now, admittedly, another way that the schools are annoying is that some will say, you've got 250 characters to describe your job. And some will say you've got 100 characters, and you've got 500 characters. Like, it drives me crazy. But at least if you've got them sort of in advance, you can at least run spell check on them. And then that way, if you copy and paste things over, it's less likely for there to be a typo. I've had people with salaries, you know, I had someone once accidentally put an extra 0 because they were just like entering in the number and they hit an extra 0 on their salary. And that was embarrassing. I mean, again, eventually, yeah, does it impact, this person did not get in the first year, but then got in on a second year when they were a reapplicant. It just doesn't look good. It's not like, oh, this is the thing that's going to condemn you to the world of the rejection pile. But it doesn't look great when, like, then a day or two later, you have to sheepishly email and be like, my salary is actually not $45 zillion a year. It's $45,000, right? Like, whatever that difference is. So you don't want to have these sloppy things. And again, like, nobody thinks they're going to be the one to do it. And yet every year, lots of people do it. And as I mentioned before, your job title has to match in the application form. It has to match your official title. Otherwise, the background check people are going to have a complete meltdown if it's a different title. Even if internally that is your title. So if you're like, well, Maria, but internally, my actual title is really boring, but internally I have a lot of responsibility. Here's what I would say in the resume: put what your official title is. But then when you're describing your role underneath, you could say something like, as the de facto project manager for a team of 6, and then also make sure that your recommender backs you up on this, right? Even though her title is very junior, she's actually doing a lot of stuff. She's essentially the project manager for the company or for the department or for whatever, right? So you can still convey that your job is in fact much more interesting than your title, but please actually put the real title, because you don't want to be in this awkward situation 6 months from now. Okay, so now that I've gotten you to make sure that all of that is in good shape and you've taken a little bit of a mental break from the essays, now go back to your essays with fresh eyes, because this happens if you are writing the essay. It happens as an admissions consultant if you're rereading the same essay over and over again. You're going to miss things. It's because brains aren't perfect. Things are going to start to blur together. You're going to miss things. So if you take at least a day or two break and then go back and reread with fresh eyes, you are less likely to make a mistake that would otherwise your brain wouldn't catch, right? It would just blur over it and then you miss it. So I would advise that you run your essays through an online grammar checker. My favorite one so far that I've found, and there are new ones coming out every day, but there's one called Hemingway app. I believe they have a free it's like a free in browser. And one of the things I like about them is I don't know if you can see here that says, for example, the word utilize in pink is highlighted. And one thing Hemingway app tells you to do is to simplify your wording. I know this is not an essay webinar, but there's an often a common uh, understandable yet misguided tendency for people to say, I'm applying to a super fancy school. Verily, I must therefore utilize verbiage that makes me sound highly educated. Like, oh my God, don't do it. Don't use the word utilize. Do not utilize the word utilize when you can just say use instead. Please, please write your essays in plain English. I beseech thee. Because admissions officers are tired and they want to get to know you as a person. And so even like if you put a lot of big words, they're going to be too tired to figure out like what does this word soup even mean? And you're not going to be very likable, right? You want them to like you. And so if you put lots of fancy words, it's going to actually totally backfire. If you've got any friends who might have been literature majors, uh, you know, maybe buy them a coffee, get them some dinner delivered, buy them dinner, have it delivered to their house in a socially distanced way, and in return, see if they will read your stuff. One thing I want you to particularly double check if you're like, yeah, Maria, of course I'm going to run that through spell check. Just make sure that spell check, spell check is not infallible. It's not perfect. See what I'm doing? It's not likable when people use unnecessarily big words. So, for example, something like compliment versus complement. That's something that a spell checker might not necessarily get, but it's the wrong version of the word being used. I found this really funny little newspaper clipping about a typo that spell check did not catch. So it was about this local band, and it said, oh, his bandmate is on drugs. And in fact, they meant to say the bandmate is on drums. So can you imagine, like, you're in this local band, you finally get your big write up in the local paper, and you're like, oh, let me see if I find my name, and it's like I'm on drugs. You're like, what? No, I'm on drums. So anyway, that's sort of a funny example. But think about it. Spell check would never know. Even a grammar checker wouldn't know if it says, "Oh, Eric, what's his name? Eric Lyday. Eric Lyday is on drugs." That sounds perfectly grammatically correct to me. So just don't rely too much on the checkers and the automatic things. And then also, again, a thing that everyone is like, Maria, I'm not that stupid. I'm not going to leave the name Tuck in the essay for Kellogg and vice versa. I'm not dumb. And yet it happens every year. So many people do this. Even people who eventually get into top programs, they'll be like, OMG, in my optional essay, especially if you're recycling parts of one essay to another, just make sure that you don't say Wharton and Booth and vice versa. Like, please, just maybe what you might want to do is, if you are recycling a same essay between two schools, just like search for, let's say you're using similar essays, like Columbia and Wharton have pretty similar essays, right? Especially essay one for both of them is pretty similar, right? So just go to the Columbia essay and just search for the word Wharton if you are, swapping them, and then vice versa. Go to your Wharton essay and just search for Columbia, CBS, anything like that, just to make sure that you're not telling another school how much you love a different school. Okay. And then after you hit submit, hopefully several hours earlier, I want you to take a break because this process is so stressful and it's so hard and you lose so much sleep over it and it's a lot of work. I know. And if you're like, Maria, you're old and you applied to business school like 20 years ago, how can you possibly remember? I remember because it's that traumatic and it lives in my brain for the rest of my life. I'm going to have nightmares about almost missing. The reason I'm so into like the whole like don't wait for the deadline is because I was like I ended up submitting like 2 minutes before my deadline and I thought I was going to die because like I was in another country and the internet was like not working and I was just sweating. So don't be me. Learn from my mistakes. And also, in case you're wondering, last year my son went through the application process for private school. So I get it, man. After this, you have worked so hard. Regardless of the outcome, I want you to be proud of yourself for a number of reasons. That you even did this process. A lot of people, number 1, are like, "Well, maybe I should get a master's degree, but, oh, it sounds like a lot of work. Forget it. I'm just gonna sit on the couch." Or a lot of people, they start to apply and then they're like, "Oh, I have to write how many essays and I need to do how much, ugh, never mind." So the fact that you even want to improve yourself enough that you've put yourself through this hellish process, I want you to pat yourself on the back and say, "You know what? This shows that I have a lot of positive attributes." And even no matter what happens with this process, right? Because the process at the end of the day can become a bit of a crapshoot. It really can, right? If you've got literally like 300 Deloitte consultants who they all work at Deloitte and they all work on the whatever and they've all gotten the applause award and they've all, like, at a certain point, you just got to be like, okay, fine, this one. Right? So, regardless of what happens, I want, and you're going to think like, "Oh, she's just trying to make me feel better." I'm not. If the fact that you're the sort of person who went through this process, it shows that you have enough initiative that you are going to go far in your career even if the MBA thing doesn't work out. Right? Because if you continue to put that in the same initiative and the same effort that you showed in the application process, if you just continue to show that in your job, your career is going to end up going really well, despite you, regardless of whether or not you get into MBA. So I'm just telling you that. Just remember that. Number 2, think of what's like some sort of a reward you can give yourself to get through this big push. Um, I do the same thing too. As soon as I log off of this webinar, I have back to back to back to back to back to back to back essay reviews for pretty much the next, I don't know, 600 hours or something. Like, okay, I'm not going to stay up all night. Because I'm too old, I can't do it anymore. But you know what I mean? Like, the next week for me is going to look really stressful. And let me tell you, I have a little reward waiting for me. And whenever I'm like, "Oh, I'm so tired of this," I'm like, "No, no, no. Think of the reward. You're almost there. You work, round 1 is almost done. Hallelujah." So I want you, really come up with an actual reward that's gonna get you excited so that when you do hit submit, you feel like, "Ah, that's it. I've earned something good." Um, it may or may not be ice cream. I'm not saying it has to be ice cream, but I'm just saying that ice cream can be a good idea to use. And I want you to just take a couple of weeks off from the admissions process. I don't want you to be, sometimes people are like, "Okay, I hit submit yesterday. Should I start prepping for my interview?" No, not right now. Sweetie, be kind to yourself. Take a week or 2 off. Watch some really good TV. If you're looking for recommendations, I really recommend Ted Lasso or Grace and Frankie. They're really delightful little shows, just in case you need some recommendations. Now, if you are applying in round 1, I don't want you to take the rest of your life off. I want you to take a few weeks off. But if you applied to round 1, and especially if you applied to schools that are really tough to get into, um, the way how the timing works for all of these deadlines in round 1, let's say the application is due first week of September, you might start hearing about interview invites, let's call it first to third week of October. So either you're going to get rejected from all of the places in October, in which case, great, you've still got a couple of months to get ready for round 1. But the tougher situation to be in is actually if you get invited to interview, you're not going to find out the results of that interview and the overall process until around December 12th, December 10th, December 15th, something like that. So at that point, if you follow me, if you get the interview invite, but then you don't get in, you'll then be left with only about 2 weeks to throw together frantically a number of round 2 applications. And I don't want you to be in that situation. So, if you're applying to a bunch of schools that are hard schools, and I think in this day and age, almost every school is a hard school, take a few weeks off, but then, maybe come back to, okay, start thinking, what would my round 2 schools be? Let's look at the essays. Can I recycle a bunch of my existing essays? Or, oh my gosh, this is a completely different essay about like diversity and inclusion. I haven't even thought, what am I going to write? So at least start thinking about, if I need to apply to these other schools in a couple months, at least start setting or laying the groundwork. So that way, in case you only end up with 2 weeks to prepare, you're not going to be like completely blindsided. Okay. So those are my tips. Oh my gosh, what a fast. I think this is the shortest presentation I've ever given. Let me see. Am I back? Okay. All right, I think I'm back. Yay. All right, so yeah, only half an hour. Crazy. All right, so now I've got half an hour and we're gonna cover um, some comments and questions. So we've already had some people submit, like pre-submit questions. So let's go. Someone asked a question about the Cornell short-term and long-term goals. The long-term goal is private equity. So short-term has to be IB, investment banking, as PE does not directly recruit. That is correct. Candidates need to have deal experience. Correct. So my whole pitch is that IB is a means to an end. I don't think it seems less focused. This person is saying, well, does it make me seem unfocused if I say that I eventually want to work in private equity, but first I'm going to work in investment banking? It does not make you seem unfocused. On the contrary, it makes it seem like you've actually done your homework. There's nothing more frustrating than someone who's like, I have been a kindergarten teacher for 5 years, and after business school, I'm going to go work for a quantitative hedge fund. And you're like, yeah, no, it's not going to happen, sweetie. So I think it makes it seem that you've actually done your homework on what does it take to get a job in PE. So I think it's good. I would make sure that you try to emphasize which aspects of your current role um, would be attractive to investment banking recruiters. You might also want to mention, for Cornell in particular, as you might know, they have like this kind of intensive week that you spend, I think it's a week on Wall Street. Um, so you might want to mention that. And you might even want to sign up for something like, there are like some, if you're not currently in finance, there are some online Excel modeling boot camps that you might want to take for things like doing M&A evaluations. You might want to sign up for something like that, and then you could mention it perhaps in an optional essay, let's say, to convey to them like, hey, before I even get to business school, like I'm serious about this and I've already started taking the steps I'm going to need. Okay. Second question. Question number 2. It relates to Cornell's. How has your experience, oh, thank you for putting that in. How has your experience prepared and encouraged you to? Should we address the immediate short-term goal or the long-term goal, which I am aspiring to pursue? I think it's both. I think what you talk about in this essay is you say the preparation piece is exactly what I was just mentioning for the last question. This is where you say something like, hey, right now I'm a data scientist. And so even though I don't have a finance background, I have spoken to people who work in finance, and they have said that the fact that I know how to run a Monte Carlo simulation in my sleep is going to be beneficial when I am in the future modeling out debt scenarios for, you know, a mezzanine debt deal or whatever it is that you're doing. So I would definitely say for the preparation piece, definitely point out which aspects of your current job or current experience tie into that short-term goal in particular, right? Because if the long-term goal depends upon a short-term goal and then you don't get that short-term goal, you're not going to get the long-term goal. Whoop, it disappeared. So just make sure that I would talk about both, but I think the second part, the encouraging you, that is where if your current job or your current path has in some way, um, you've had an experience that made you realize like, oh, this is the thing I want to do, then I would talk about that in that way, right? And I would say like, okay, yeah, I'm a consultant, and I had a client who was an airline during COVID, and it really made me realize I want to work in airlines going forward. For the long term, then I would be a little bit of both, honestly. But if you have to pick one, like you're like there's simply not enough room, I would at least state what it is about your long-term goal that you find compelling. So that way I know that you're actually serious about it and you didn't just pick something out of a hat. And then I would focus more on pragmatically, what are you doing or what have you done that is going to make you appealing to that short-term employer? Because that way I'll be more comfortable that you're going to get that job after you graduate. Okay. Is it okay if there is an overlap between essay stories and recommendation stories? So overlap is great in terms of, especially if your recommender backs you up on something. So if you write in an essay, I helped this team that was stuck overcome this impasse, right? We were all fighting and no one was getting along. And then I came in and I fixed things. Your recommender can back you up on that, especially if you are, as sometimes people say here in the US, punching above your weight class. Like if you are sort of at a more junior part in your career, but you actually have relatively significant responsibilities and you write about those in an essay, a cynical or overworked admissions officer might say, like, did she really do that? I mean, she says that she was responsible for doing this, but was she really? I mean, she's only 3 years out of college. So the recommender can absolutely back you up and be like, no, we actually did put her in charge of this stuff because she's that good. But I don't want there to be complete overlap. If you say, I did the following 3 things to get this thing to be fixed, and then your recommender says she did the following 3 things for this to be fixed, that's a missed opportunity. So you can both talk about the same event or the same activity or the same accomplishment, but try to focus on different aspects. Try to ask your recommender to focus on different aspects. In particular, those interpersonal leadership aspects, like what have you done to persuade other people? How does this rest of senior management at your company view you? Hopefully it's positively. Those are sort of insights that your recommender can give that you would ostensibly, presumably not actually know about yourself, right? So a recommender could say something like, oh yeah, the other day the CEO said to me that Capria 007 is, the best analyst we've had in 10 years, right? Or something like that. Like your recommender can throw that in. If you say that about yourself, it's going to be kind of like braggy. Like, yeah, did you know that the CEO says that I'm amazing? Like, it just doesn't come across quite as well. So your recommender can also do a lot of bragging for you that you can't do for yourself because it would just look unappealing for you to brag about yourself. Okay. Informative yet super. Thank you, Anusha. I appreciate that. What must do things for international applicants that applying to MBA degree at Ivy League schools? Okay, Elchin, this is a pretty complicated, there's a lot. Like, what do people have to do to apply for Columbia Business School? So I think if your question is, how do we figure out if we're like good enough for a place like Columbia Business School? A piece of advice that I have is try to find your resume twin. And by that, I mean someone whose pre-MBA experience matches roughly what your pre-MBA experience is. So if you're working at a large multinational corporation and you start asking around and you realize that for the past 7 years, multiple people from your company have applied to Columbia Business School and not a single one has gotten in, that might be an indicator to you, perhaps, that Columbia just might not be feeling what you do for a living, um, or et cetera, et cetera. So I, I'm guessing that you are still a ways away from applying. If you're asking right now, what do we have to do to get in? But if you are quite a ways away from applying, I would say take on as much leadership responsibility as you can. Try to make as much of a positive impact as you can, even if this involves taking some risks at some point, um, being courageous, stepping out of your comfort zone, doing those sorts of things, because those are going to give you the growth opportunities and the ability to make an impact. No business school really wants someone who just like shows up at 9 a.m., does exactly what they are told and nothing else, and then leaves at 6 p.m. and they don't do edit. Like, people who do the bare minimum is not what these schools are looking for. So ask yourself, what are things I can do that go above and beyond the bare minimum? And hopefully that'll start getting you the accomplishments that you need to then stand out when you eventually apply. All right, I took my GRE thrice, but have missed my target by 3 points. Retaking the test post deadline. I know you're freaking out. Uma, I'm sorry that you're freaking out. So I would say submit, because I guess our brains all work in different ways. So I personally am better if I have to study for a test, if I just study for the test and I'm not distracted with other things like essays and the forms and all those other things. Some people work better if they have different things to distract themselves and jump between. Depending on how you think you work best, for example, since I need to focus on just one thing and not have the other things floating above my head freaking me out, I would personally try to submit the applications. If you're definitely taking it after the deadline, just submit the applications now or like over the weekend, get them out the door. So that way they're not hanging over your head. And then that way you can turn all of your attention to the test. Realize that some schools might say, like, okay, we will take this. You took it after the deadline, but it's okay. We'll still consider it. But schools might also be like, look, the deadline's the deadline. Sorry. So you might as well, though. There's no harm to retaking it. Because even if it's too late for some of the round one schools and some of them say, sorry, we really can't we can't really consider this. Some of them might say, okay, we'll consider it. And if you end up having to apply for round two anyway, it'll be good to have the stronger score. So also, if you have already looked at the GMAT, I advise most people to try to take like a practice GRE and a practice GMAT just to see which one they feel better or more comfortable with. So if the GRE just isn't working for you and you're like, oh, I hate the stupid test, like maybe look at the GMAT. Maybe it'll be better. I don't know. But yeah, just I would say personally, if I were you, I would just be like, let's just submit everything. And that way I don't, even if it's like a week early, I don't have it hanging over me so I can study. Can re-applicants use the same essays as last year? So what I would say is I would not reuse the same essays as last year, because the exact same essays at least, because if they really were your best stories and you didn't get accepted, then maybe they weren't quite strong enough. So, you know what I mean? Because if they really were like amazing essays, you might have gotten in. So, what I would say is if you're going to talk about the same stories, I get it. Maybe it's only been 6 or 8 months since you applied. Maybe not a whole lot has changed. But what I would challenge you to do is if you've got the same stories to write about, consider rewriting the story, the essay, in which you focus on different aspects of the story, perhaps. So, a common mistake people make is, just to throw something out there, if they have a very technical job, they might focus on the IQ that it took to write the algorithm that automatically did the stuff. And that's not what the business schools care about. They care more about those EQ skills, not the IQ skills. So if you also were working with a team and you had to motivate a team to get a certain deadline, don't talk about, look at how smart I am. I developed this algorithm all by myself. Look at how big my brain is. Instead, that part is really not super important. Instead, have it be about, like, my team had this huge deadline. People were quitting. I was able to get people to not quit. I went to the client and I said, hey, could we please have an extra week? I know that you really want this, but blah, 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 blah. What if we do this? If you can show those negotiation, motivation, persuasion skills, maybe that way you're still talking about the same story or the same anecdote, but at least you're focusing on different aspects of it. But I would certainly not just reuse the same essay. Even if it was a good enough essay and you just didn't get in because of the luck of the draw, it'll just look sloppy, right? Because most schools pull up, if you were a recent reapplicant, they will pull up the previous essay and put it side by side with the current essay. And so if you just submit the same thing, even if it was an amazing, like Pulitzer Prize winning essay, it's still just going to look sloppy. It's going to look like you didn't put in any effort. So I would rewrite it, even if it's the same story. Also, would it be bad to completely change your career goals if you're a reapplicant, but explain it in the reapplicant essay? I don't think it's bad at all. I think what you should say is, when I applied last year, I had not yet done as much research on either a viable career path or a career path that interests me, et cetera, et cetera. And so now what I've done, here are all the ways I've become a stronger candidate in the past 8, 12 months, whatever. And one of those ways is I actually started talking to people who work in investment banking, whatever it is. And I started realizing that, last year I said I wanted to do McKinsey but now I've realized that I would actually be more, you can say, like, I would find something else more fulfilling or whatever. So if you had applied, especially if last year you had applied with one of those like, not a crazy career goal, but a very difficult to attain career goal, and you think that they got cold feet because they were worried about your ability to get that job, and now you're like, ooh, let me scale that back a little. I think instead of saying like, I realized that you thought that I was too ambitious last time, so now I'm pretending to be slightly less ambitious in the hopes that you'll accept me. Instead of putting it that way, just kind of be like, oh, upon further reflection on what my passions are, and after doing more research, I realized that instead, this is where I want to go. Mhm. How can we demonstrate credibility towards entrepreneurship as a long-term goal, especially if we have not done anything related to starting up a company, but have worked in the same industry? So if there are any applicant lab users on the chat today, I would guess that you guys could now type in the chat that Maria would say, don't say entrepreneurship is your goal. If you really don't have like any evidence at all that entrepreneurship is something you would be good at, that you would enjoy, because entrepreneurship sounds, it's like management consulting. Like, it sounds super sexy from far away. Like, consulting, you mean I get to travel to all of these places and I get to stay at hotels and whatever. And then the reality is like, nonprofit is another one. Like, at one point I was like, I'm going to work in the nonprofits field. And then I did an internship in nonprofit and I was like, oh my God, like, I can't do this. Oh my God. I don't have the emotional fortitude for this. God bless the people who do. I'm not one of them. And so entrepreneurship's the same way, where it sounds, look, if everyone is Mark Zuckerberg, then it would be great. Oh gosh, sorry. I just threw my hands out and hit myself. Um, but the fact is that entrepreneurship actually has a lot of it that is terrible. And so a lot of people, when they say they want to become entrepreneurs, if you don't have any evidence of that, then I might think to myself, well, how do you know that this is really what, like, do you know what entrepreneurship is in real life, or do you have kind of like the Hollywood version in your head of what entrepreneurship is, where everything goes right and you don't run out of money and you don't feel like crying yourself to sleep every night? Um, I'm speaking from experience here. Cough, cough. So I would say maybe you say that the long-term goal in that case is that you want to have a certain impact on the world, right? I want to help small companies access credit through fintech tools, just to make something up. And there are two ways I could do that. One, I could go work for a major bank and try to the innovation division of a major bank and try to create tools that will help small enterprises. Or perhaps I could explore entrepreneurship. And then you could talk about how you would use your time at the business school to explore it. But that way you're not saying, I'm going to become an entrepreneur. And then when I say like, okay, great. Well, how do you actually know what that will be like? And then it's like, oh, well, no. Right? Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's kind of a little like womp womp. So that is what I would say. And if anyone's watching this and you're still like a few years or a ways out from applying and you do think you have an entrepreneurial goal, but you work at a big company, what I would advise you to do is to try to find a local startup. It doesn't even have to be geographically local, but I mean something related to what you think your entrepreneurial goal is in. Find a startup that needs help. Every startup needs help by definition. So reach out to startups and be like, look, I'm trying to get some experience. What can I do for you? Do you need me to write blog posts? Do you need me to research your Google AdWords? Do you need me to look over your code and make sure that it's good? Like, that way, at least you can put on the resume, look, for the past 6 months, I've been helping a startup raise money. I've been helping a startup with its marketing. I've been helping. So that way, at least you've got some sort of thing on it. But that's how I would do it, Gokul. I would not put all of my eggs in the entrepreneurship basket because I'm worried that you might not have the credibility. Is there a signaling effect if we apply to colleges that aren't tier 1 in round 1, which demonstrates interest? I'm not sure the question is a signaling effect. I mean, if I would apply to colleges that aren't tier one in round one. If you've done research on them, if you've actually like attended the webinars and signed up for the email list and clicked on the emails and talked to a student ambassador, I think that's why wouldn't you apply in round one? I don't understand the signaling effect if we apply to colleges that aren't tier one. Sorry, if you could re-ask your question and then maybe I can answer it. I'm thinking of applying round two for HBS. Is there a big difference between round one and round two, scholarship opportunities, et cetera, et cetera? Okay, John, I think, Abhijit, I don't know if you've got it handy, the link, like just, what is it, a couple weeks ago, I made a video on round one versus round two that is up here on GMAT Club somewhere. There is not a big difference between round one and round two. The only real big difference is if you are from an overrepresented group. So if you are a management consultant, a banker, an Indian engineer, whatever those groups are, where it's just like, oh my gosh, it's an avalanche of people. It is better. Oh, thank you. There you go. That's where I have a lot. I have a lot of thoughts on round one versus round two. But so those overrepresented groups all tend to apply in round one, and so a lot of the seats go to those people in round one because it becomes like this kind of cycle where if I know that all of the management consultants are applying in round one, I'm going to give away most of my seats to management consultants in round one because I know that that's when they're coming. So if you're from an overrepresented group, it does behoove you to apply in round one. Yes, it is true that there is more scholarship money in round one, but not to the point where if you're not ready to submit, don't do it. Because if you submit an application that's pretty weak, you're not getting in anyway. And so the scholarship becomes a moot point. I was actually telling someone this the other day who was like, oh, if I want to apply to Columbia early decision, which is a binding early decision, but I'm worried that I might not get a scholarship because obviously the school doesn't have to give scholarships to early decision people because they know that you're going there no matter what. So I said, well, then the question for you is how badly do you really want to go to Columbia? If you really want to go, then apply early decision because that way at least you have a better chance of getting accepted as opposed to worrying about a scholarship that might not happen if you don't get in. So I will say also, John, specifically, you asked about HBS. HBS scholarships do not matter at all based on round because HBS scholarships are done entirely on a need-based system. That is, they will ask you for your tax returns over the past couple of years. They'll ask you for bank records and all kinds of stuff like that. HBS does not do a lot. They have a few, very random merit-based scholarships, but virtually none. Most people who get scholarships at HBS is entirely need-based. So in that case, it's not like, oh, we've got a pool of scholarship money that we have as a school that we're going to try to use to lure good candidates here. Because also the other thing is that normally the higher the ranked the school is, the less scholarship money they have to give because they know that you're going to go there, right? It's the lower ranked schools that throw out a lot more scholarship money because they want to attract stronger candidates because those stronger candidates become stronger alumni and then the brand of the school goes up. Schools will also often throw out scholarship money to buy GMAT scores. So we all know that the average GMAT score, this is stupid, but it matters a lot to the rankings people. And so schools that are trying to like edge their way into the top 20, top 15, top 10, they might try to do it through GMAT scores, and they might therefore buy a GMAT score to either try to increase the overall or to say, well, we have this one person from a nonprofit that is just doing amazing things, but they only have a 520. So we need to let someone in with like a 770 so that way our average doesn't go down. And so that's another case where schools might give you a scholarship. But I would not count on scholarships at all for business school. Nobody should count on getting a scholarship. You should walk into this process. If you get one, great. They are not as common as they were in undergrad, and everyone going into this process needs to be prepared to take out student loans. I think it's 180,000 or something is the total cost of 2 years at a top school, but don't count on the scholarship. So in sum and in conclusion, if you're not from an overrepresented group, go round two. Even if you are from an overrepresented group, if right now your essay is kind of in shambles and your recommender hasn't really got it together yet, wait, it's better to apply in round 2 with a strong application than round 1 with something that is super half-baked. If there is a recent job change, can you please advise whom to reach out for recommendations? Yes, so Vidya, I would reach out to your most recent supervisor at your last job. Every admissions office is going to totally get it. Like, you just started a new job. So number 1, your current boss doesn't know you that well. And number 2, if you tell your boss, hey, thanks for hiring me. By the way, I might leave in 9 months to go to business school. It might be a career limiting move. So no admissions officer is going to be like, why didn't Vidya get that recommendation from her current boss? They totally get it. So just most schools, speaking of the application forms and the 4 million little bubbles and boxes that they have, many of them will say something like, if your current supervisor is not a recommender, please use this space to explain why. And if you just say, current boss doesn't know me that well, you know, I just started. I don't want them to know that I'm applying. And also, my previous boss was my boss for a year, 2 years, 3 years, whatever. And therefore, this person can really speak to who I am. You're going to be fine. Okay, so some applications have extracurricular fields like the nonprofit or the organization name and the number of years of experience like Wharton. I only have intermittent positions and mostly initiatives within work. So is your name Rakesh? I'm like, is there an E missing? Rakesh. So Rakesh, or possibly Rakesh. Um, I would say if you've been doing initiatives within work, I would count that as an extracurricular activity because it's not something that is required of you for your job. It is something that you are doing outside of work, outside of your day-to-day responsibilities, outside of the thing you are getting paid the salary to do. It just so happens to be going on in a work environment, but it is not work. So what I would say is if it's part of an organization, like let's say it's the, I don't know, Google Engineers Meditation Club that you helped found or that you're helping to run, something at work, then just put for the name of the organization, don't just say Google, say Google Meditation Club, and then that's where you can describe that. But definitely let them know about these things because these are things that you've done that are not part of your job. And so even if they happen at work, it's okay. It's still, to me, it still counts as an extracurricular, and I think they would agree. Any broad tips for writing goals essays for a deferred admission? Gaurav, I have an entire, well, okay. I'm like, it's like the last person who was like, the person who was like, oh, what do you do to get into Columbia Business School? I'm like, I have a product called Applicant Lab, applicantlab.com, where I have like hours of advice. What I would say, Gaurav, is just quickly for deferred admission candidates, and by the way, deferred admission, oh, I think some schools do let you. I'm like, a lot of them don't even ask for your application until the spring. I would have it, as with everyone, I would have it build upon things you have done in the past. So that way you have a concrete proof or concrete evidence of actual skill and interest in whatever it is. And then you have to then, it's a little bit tricky, right? Because a lot of times it's actually a lot better if you already have your post-college job in hand, because then that way you write your essay about like, okay, so I've already got this position at Facebook, whatever. And so at that job, I'm going to spend 2 years learning blah, blah, blah. And then I will, my plan would be to then try to get maybe a project management or a product manager experience, maybe at a startup that is a self-driving car startup. And then I would get the MBA. And then I would reach the long-term goal. So people who are not deferred applicants just say, here's where I've been, and then here's what where I want to go in the short term, and then in the long term. Deferred applicants have one extra step, which is here's where I've been, which is there's a lot less of it. Here's where I'm going in the next few years. And then here's where I want to go after business school. And then here's where I want to go in the long term. So, but I would make sure that it is cohesive. Speaking of the nonprofit thing, I had someone who was like going into banking, who was like an economics major, going to work at an investment bank, applying for deferred admission, and then saying, well, after HBS, I'm going to go work in the nonprofit sector. And I was like, you've never done anything in the nonprofit sector. And in fact, you are picking what is presumably one of the highest paying, if not the highest paying job. So it's kind of hard for me to believe that you care about poor people, because if you cared about them, you would be doing that job now. You wouldn't be going to bulge blue, whatever it's called, bulge bracket, blue chip firm. You wouldn't be doing that. So just make sure, don't do what that person was thinking of doing. Make sure it all is cohesive and flows together. Should you request that recommenders customize letters for different schools? Conodine, I don't think so. The schools understand that recommenders are busy. They understand that they are doing you a favor, and so it's fine to have the same recommendation. In fact, even there's some schools that might say, like, you know, um, like for example, like Stanford, at least until recently, you had like 1,000 words for the recommender to write about what they like about you, but HBS only had like 300 words, and so people would freak out. Like, if you end up with like 400 words for HBS and you just use the same thing for HBS, it's fine. Like, it's if you go a little bit over, because they understand they're not going to hold the recommender to the same level of, if you're over on your essays that have word counts, not a good look. But if your recommender goes over or under, it doesn't matter so much. So I would just say have them create the one version and it's fine. Even for Wharton, like Wharton has these weird questions. They've even said, like, look, we understand that our questions are a real pain in the patoot. And so we get it. We get that you're probably applying to other schools, and we get that your recommenders are busy. So even if you just have them copy and paste their other recommendation for other schools here, if they really don't have time to answer our weird specific questions. So the schools are cool with it. So I wouldn't worry about it. How important is it to include your salary in the ad versus omitting it? I am earning close to 20% more than the average MBA salary. I'm worried that the AdComs might not consider me for financial aid. So, Ravish, you probably won't get considered for financial aid because you shouldn't be, because if you're making more money, then why should you get financial aid when someone who has been working with refugees in the Congo for the past 5 years and has been making $20,000 a year? Like, that financial aid exists not so that people making a lot of money can go to school. Financial aid exists for people who would otherwise not be able to go to school to be able to get in. Now, if getting a scholarship is something that really matters to you, what I would advise you to do is find a school whose average GMAT is, let's say, 40, 60 points lower, 50, 60 points lower than your GMAT score. And then if it's a lower tier school, they will be more likely to want to buy your GMAT, so to speak. So they will be more likely to give you scholarship money. But again, Harvard and Stanford in particular, they are primarily need-based schools, and I agree with that. I'm fine with, with it being based on how much you earn. And also, again, scholarships are not, there's this idea, I think sometimes there's this idea that scholarships there's a million of them. Not really, especially if you're from an overrepresented group, right? The other thing admissions committees might want to buy is someone who's underrepresented. So if we need more women, if our dean has set us a goal to get to 40% women students by next year, women are going to be more likely to get scholarships, right? Like, the scholarship is a tool to try to craft the class and to try to help people who may not have the financial means any other way to make it feasible for them. So I would include it, because at least what you're saying is you're showing them my employer likes me enough. Look at how much they're compensating me, right? It shows that you are accomplished, right? And that you are doing very well in your career. So I would always include the salary. And then it's like, well, he didn't include the salary. Like, it's so weird. Like, is he hiding something? What's happening here? Like, I would just include it. I think your goal should be to get accepted to the best school you can. If that means taking out 180 grand in loans, you're in good company, because most of us do. I didn't get any scholarship money at all for my MBA, and it all worked out. So, you'll be in very good company if you don't get a scholarship. I would focus on just getting in. How does one explain the need for an MBA if you have 15 years of experience? Would most MBAs give such candidate admission? So Ravi, unfortunately, the answer is no. Most full-time MBA programs would not give someone with 15 years of experience admission. So it would be the executive MBA is what they would push you for. Some schools are nice about it. So if you apply to their full-time MBA, I've seen this with Darden. UVA Darden, if you are more of a better fit for their executive program, but you apply to full-time, I've seen them actually reach out to people and be like, look, we're not letting you into full-time. It's not a good fit. But if you want to join the executive program, let's talk. But a lot of schools will just be like, nope, sorry. And then they won't tell you anything. So if you've got 15 years of experience, an executive program, a part-time program, definitely for you. Oh, we're moving on. Round one versus round, oh yes, a lot of queries, round one versus round two. Yes, you can see me talk about that. I'm applying as a QuestBridge scholar for their, oh, do they have, is it a pilot year for MBAs? Oh, that's really cool. Okay, sorry. If I have limited time to study for the GMAT, if I don't get the needed GMAT score, should I not apply? So Olivia, since I did not know that QuestBridge was starting an MBA scholarship, I only know them for college. It depends on what their own language is. If they say it's an absolute minimum score and we will not consider you below that, then I don't know what to tell you. But if they say it's like the recommended score, then you might as well apply and see what happens. And maybe what you do is you tell them like, hey, I didn't really get a chance to study, but I'm studying now and I've signed up for an online test prep company. And please look to my grades as if you had like good college grades, like look to my grades instead. That I know I can do better, and then see what happens. But if they tell you it has to be a certain number, then I think it has to be that number. But if it's also their first year doing it, I have no experience with it. I apologize. Okay, what's our next question? Okay, Olivia, we already did Olivia. Sorry, I'm scrolling through the comments. Subscribe for the YouTube channel. Okay, oh. No, this one I think we already did. Let me say, I see one here from, oh, I was just trying to click on this one and I was like, nothing's happening. Okay, how do top B schools look at startup experience if you're working at the biggest startup in the country and a VC funded startup? So, I mean, startup experience is great, especially if it is a well-funded startup, because that way there's evidence that the startup is actually a real thing. I do think that unfortunately, some people out there in the past, what they would try to do is they basically get their parents to write them a check, and then they like, I work for a startup that is really my dad just paying me to sit around. And so it's like, well, kind of see through that. But if it is a legitimate startup, if it's one of the biggest in the country, if it's VC funded, I would make sure though, if you're not from, if let's say you're applying to a school in the UK and the startup is not in the UK, they might not know what it is. So you might need to write in the resume like Flipkart is the blah, 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 the largest whatever, it's raised a ton of money from, and then list like the VCs they would have heard of. So if it was like Andreessen Horowitz or A16 or whatever they're called, mention them, but don't mention like if it's a local VC. So that way they will say like, oh, this is a legitimate startup. If it really is the biggest startup in the country, like I don't know. I don't know who the biggest startup is right now in other countries, but I'm just saying like Flipkart is one that just immediately comes to mind. I think they were bought by Walmart though. Anyway, there's a really good chance they would have heard of it, but don't take your chances. And it's good, right? The good news about working at a startup is that often you get more leadership and more ability to make an impact versus at a very large company where it might be like, well, this is your job, employee number, 24601, and you can only do this part of the job and you may not do anything else. At least at a startup, it's a lot more opportunity to wear different hats and to be like, let's launch this new thing. I've decided to lead it. So startup experience can be really great. Cornell has one letter of recommendation, but they accept one more. My first recommender is my current boss. Should I still add another LOR for my previous boss or additional recommender? If you think that person is going to say really nice things about you, go for it. it certainly doesn't hurt. Now, if you have your current bosses as a recommendation, and then you're like, "Well, I don't actually know if my previous boss liked me that much." If you think there would be a gamble, then I wouldn't gamble on it, but if you think your previous boss is gonna say nice things about you, why not? Why not add that extra data that makes you look good? Yay. My part 2 is what are the full-time 1 year on campus, even if it's weekly, but on Ravi, I'm sorry, I don't have, like, an encyclopedic knowledge of every program that's, like, weekly but on campus. Some of the executive programs are once a month. I think Booth has one that's, like, once a month in Miami. Or is that Kellogg? Ravi, unfortunately, that's the sort of research you would have to do, yourself or ask someone else because I don't have them all memorized. Is there any advice in Applicant Lab for the INSEAD video questions? Yes, I do have advice. I have advice for video interviews in general, and then advice for how to prepare, especially because the INSEAD ones, yeah, there's just, you have no idea what you're going to get, right? It might be like, it might be, it's probably going to be something about asking you, let me see if my memory serves me correctly. I think they usually ask for one about, like, to show that you have cross-cultural or international understanding of working with people from different backgrounds. So there might be one like, tell us about a time that you worked with someone from a different background, or have you ever experienced culture shock? If so, tell us about it. So they do tend to fall into buckets, and I think I've got what some of those buckets are in the lab. But if memory serves correctly, it is often one of the buckets is something having to do with talk, like show us that you've actually had international, like some sort of international experience. So I have advice for that. Um, and also, honestly, like, I know it's like, oh, there's like 700 potential questions. I would not try to memorize the questions. I have been asked sometimes, like, well, Maria, why don't you compile like all whatever 500 questions or whatever it is? It's almost because I don't want you to drive yourself crazy because there's no way you are going to memorize all 500 questions. It's much better to think about, like, what are the buckets of questions I might be asked, right? So for most schools, you might be asked, why our school? Why do you want to come to our school? Why is now the right time to do an MBA? You will often be asked some sort of leadership question that might be a tell us about a leadership accomplishment you have, or tell us about a time you failed as a leader, something about where you will give an example of a time you were a leader. Many ones will have a bucket of like just something fun, like if you could be a vegetable, what would it be? Um, and then INSEAD in particular, I think, has the international culture shock, a time you had to work with someone who didn't understand you, those sorts of questions. So my advice for those, for the Kira talent ones where you don't know what you're going to get, is to prepare for the different buckets of questions you might get, because I don't want you to then memorize and be like, if they ask you, tell us about a time you experienced culture shock, but you have been mentally prepared and memorized an answer to a slightly different variation of that question, I don't want you to then launch on this memorized speech that doesn't really answer the question. Or if the question's a little bit different, I don't want you to be like, well, I didn't prepare for this, I prepared for slightly different, like, just, I would say, get ready for certain groups, and then otherwise, because honestly, the other thing they want to know, it's not about coming up with the best answer for the Kira talent. It's also they want to see how comfortable you are with uncertainty and how do you react on your feet, right? They want, with the exception of Kellogg, for some reason, tells you what the questions are in advance, which I think is a little odd, but they want you to be thrown off balance, right? So it's not about like, oh, gee, if this person gets thrown off balance, is that a bad thing? Like, they want to see how you react to a stressful situation. They want to see how you react to the unexpected and to the unknown. They also want to get a sense of your energy. Do you give across a positive, not happy necessarily, but do you give across like a positive, energetic energy? That's not good talking. But or are you like, hello, my name is Rakesh and I am an engineer, and right? So, and they also want to see, frankly, if you speak English. That's another thing, is that increasingly these schools are doing these video things, because what happened in the past, and I've experienced this as an admissions consultant, you see someone's essay and you see the application form and it's all flawless and it's great. but then it's clear you talk to them for 10 seconds on the mock interview and you're like, oh my gosh, you paid someone to write this essay, didn't you? Because the essay is like, I love scuba diving. It makes me feel so alive. And then you get in front of them with a mock essay and mock interview, and they don't really know how to speak. So then it just wastes everyone's time. So I think the Kira talent thing is in part to like let's not waste our time scheduling a full interview just in case this person, in case they used the Hemingway app for their grammar checking but they don't actually speak English or whatever language our program is in. Okay, what's our next? Have I heard of anyone who got accepted to these top schools with a GMAT waiver? Yeah, of course. For sure. The schools are offering the waivers because they want to provide opportunities for people to apply even if the GMAT is not their strongest thing. And so what they're basically now, it's like I say, some of the schools have gone test optional, but none of them have gone brain optional. So if you apply for the waiver, you do have to provide significant evidence that I will be able to handle your coursework, right? I took all these advanced calculus classes in college. I have a CFA, whatever it is. But yeah, it totally happens. Now, I will say, scholarships have been mentioned several times here. To the extent that a lot of time a scholarship is given to try to buy a high GMAT score, if you apply with a test waiver, it is less likely that you will then get a scholarship. So keep that in mind. If you've got a really high GMAT and you're just thinking about like not using it, I wouldn't recommend that. Okay, what's next? I'm gonna take a little drink of my now very melted iced coffee. Some of the programs say they have a range and the max experience goes to 15 and the average is different. So what I would do, Ravi, is honestly reach out to the programs that you're interested in. Just reach out to the admissions offices and maybe just make sure that your resume is in good shape. Like don't send them like a 2-page or 3-page or more resume. Have a succinct resume and just email them and say, what do you think? The programs that have executive programs are going to be more likely to be honest with you because they will say like, look, honestly, our part-time program, our FEMBA program, our evening and weekend MBA program, whatever, that's going to be a better fit for you. The schools that mostly have full-time programs will think about it. It's in their best interest to encourage as many people to apply as possible. Because aside from average GMAT score, what's another statistic that makes a school seem super elite? So if the schools were very honest with people, right? Like if Harvard had a thing that was like, don't apply to Harvard if you've got 15 years of experience, and don't apply to Harvard if you're a QA engineer, and don't apply to Harvard, then more people who apply would get in, but then they would look less elite by comparison. I'm not saying the schools do this on purpose. Actually, I think some of them do. I think that it's in their best. Just think about who's got what motivation. And so if a school says like, we have a range and anyone can get in, that might be true. But it also might be true that the people who have 15 years of experience, maybe they tend to all be from the military, or maybe they have already started a very successful multi-million-dollar business, right? I have a former client. I've got 2 former clients right now in the MSX program at Stanford, which is their 1-year MBA for slightly more seasoned candidates. And it's like, yeah, one guy in our class like started his own, he's like one of the leading real estate agents in all of Northern California, and he's worth $1 zillion. So like that person might have gotten in with 20 years of experience. So I would reach out to the schools. If a school just says, we don't care, just apply anyway, I would be a little suspicious. But the schools that have the executive programs, reach out to them and just say, I want to have a conversation, or what do you think? And they will be more likely to tell it to you straight. For someone with 2 years of work experience, is listing pivotal high school awards or activities off limits? So Evan, for me it is, because think about it, like what if, just think it back, just use that same example, but think backwards in time. So like if someone were applying to college, would something from elementary school or kindergarten be off limits? right? Like, would you say like, oh, well, I'm applying to college, but in kindergarten, I won the best potty trained award for like, okay, that's great, but it's kind of a long time ago. And so it doesn't really matter. I would only, I only advocate putting anything from before college on the resume if it is something that is at the national level. So if you were the national champion in the Westinghouse science competition, or if you were, you know, top 5 in the country for cross country, you know what I mean? Or if you almost made it to the Olympics or you were in the Olympics, something like that, something that would, it would, for me, it would have to be something that is like top 5 or 10 in the entire country. But if it's just like I was the valedictorian of my high school class, like so was everyone in the candidate pool for a place like Harvard or Stanford or Wharton or Ross or Duke. Like most people were, you know, top 5% in their high schools, top 5%. You know, like overachievers tend to apply, and so I would be very judicious about high school things unless it was really like woo, amazing. Okay, your career vision is entrepreneurship. I'm not sure if I should have a backup plan. So that's me, Ravish. That's what I think. This is a very subjective process. And honestly, some people get in because their past is so impressive that the admissions office is like, well, we're going to take a chance on this person because we don't think their career vision is realistic, but who cares? Like once they get here, they'll figure something else out. Um, so I apply with whatever goal you feel comfortable with. I think you should apply with it as if somebody doesn't have entrepreneurial experience and they're suddenly like super in pretending that they're super into entrepreneurship, but they don't really have any experience with it. I don't know. I don't really believe it. So I would apply it with a plan B or have entrepreneurship be like two different ways to achieve the same ultimate impact on society. I didn't do the app lab, but if I want your review for my apps, how can I contact you? You can't, unfortunately. I only work with people who have purchased my product, who have gone through my product because I don't like repeating myself. And so if someone hasn't gone through my product and they send me a resume that sucks, I get really grumpy. And I'm actually fully booked. Sorry, I'm off super fully booked. Like even if you were to sign up right now, I'm like booked for the next 3 weeks, like the whole way through. Okay, so for a question on inclusion and diversity, if you work in a homogenous place, what are some non-standard examples? So this is a tough one, right? Because the inclusion and diversity thing, it's really a US thing. And if people aren't from the US, it's not quite it's not the same. So what I would say is, do you have any examples of a time that you have helped someone who was being excluded feel included? So maybe your country doesn't have the same race problems that the US has, but maybe your firm only, you know, I don't know if you're from India or not, but let's say you're from India. Maybe your firm typically only hires people from IITs. And maybe there's someone on your team who didn't go to IIT, and so the other people are being snobby to him. Did you do anything to try to make that person feel welcome? Was there a woman on your team that was not being treated well? Is there someone who was the first in their family to go to college, perhaps, and maybe they don't understand how to, you know, how should they dress in a white collar environment? Like, is there anything like that where someone was being excluded because of something having to do with their background or their gender? Or their caste, or if they were from a different area of India, perhaps, you know, people who were not from Maharashtra or something like that, that are from someplace else, whatever it is, but just try to come up with something that is even within a homogenous workspace, there can sometimes be differences in terms of background and people excluding others. So if you can say anything about that, and then if there really is nothing, then just say like, we just don't really have diversity and inclusion here because our company only hires 24-year-old men from IIT. And so we're all the same. And then just to kind of own up to it. So at least that way it's not that you have failed to be diverse or inclusive. It's just that you haven't had an opportunity. Abhijit wants to go to bed. I was supposed to stop at 8 too. I have like 10 essay reviews to do today. Okay. As someone with 2.5 years of work experience in management consulting, looking to switch to entertainment management, whoop, I'm an entertainment girl. Would that be a concern in my application with work experience and limited full-time experience in entertainment? So, Arushi, I think so. What I tell management again, like my whole thing is like, look, this process is really hard. It is way more competitive. I would say 90% of applicants overestimate how competitive they are when they first enter this process. So it's not just, I'm not saying like, oh, well, like I'm not trying to single anyone out. Most people overestimate their competitiveness when they enter the process. Only very rarely do I meet someone who's like, I'm only going to apply to this school that's ranked 30th. And I'm like, you should apply to Stanford. That happens like once every 5 years. Most people overestimate. So here's my point. Most people overestimate how strong they are. This process is really hard. Why introduce any aspects of cognitive friction into the reading of your application? So cognitive friction is like that moment that someone is reading and they're like, wait, what? Entertainment? Where did that come from? Will people get in if they have cognitive friction on their application? Of course, people get in with cognitive friction. But why would you risk it? Like, if it's such a hard process, like, why not smooth those gears as much as you can? And that's why I advocate a lot of what I do. Like, for example, someone who doesn't have entrepreneurial experience, can they get in with an entrepreneur? Sure, they can get in. Of course you can. But why would you make it, even if it's like just a momentary moment of like, wait, what? But you don't even want that, in my opinion. Why not just make it as smooth as possible? So for consulting, I often tell people the easiest non-cognitive, you know, friction moment is to say that you want to continue working in whatever you have been specializing in, but just in industry. So if you have been working with banks, maybe you want to go work in a bank or something related to banking like fintech. If you've been working with consumer packaged goods companies, if you've been working as an operations consultant, maybe you want to go work in industry as ultimately becoming a COO. That's just me. My whole thing is I'm trying to get you in. So once you get in, join the entertainment and media club, get that Netflix internship, but for the purposes of applying, this is just me. You can get in with cognitive friction, but why would you? Why would you even introduce it? Just my opinion, totally subjective. It is what it is. All right, thanks everyone. Please give a thumbs up. Yes, because if you give my videos thumbs up, then they ask me back again. And I like doing these, even though I got up before dawn for this. And it's my birthday today. So happy birthday to me and good luck for all the rest of you. My silent co-pilot, Abhijit, as always, thank you for your help. And yeah, best of luck, everyone. And yeah, try Applicant Lab free trial today. Thank you. Bye-bye.